This is Smoke Wallin, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
All right, thank you once again for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. Please like, subscribe, and encourage all your friends and casual acquaintances to do the same. I am really enthused about today's guest. He's a friend of mine who's founded several companies and brands, including National Wine and Spirits, which has over $1 billion in beverage sales. That's billion with a B, folks. He's an entrepreneur, an Eagle Scout, an Ivy League grad, a wine aficionado turned cannabis business leader. Please welcome Smoke Wallin to the program. How you doing, Smoke?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It is great to hear from you again. And last time we connected, you talked about being an Eagle Scout. And Smoke, I'm planning a trip to Washington State with my two boys. And we're going to stay in a cabin for a night without any Wi-Fi. Would that get us at least on the path to being an Eagle Scout?
It's a good first step, Matt, and I recommend more of that. It's always a journey. I'm an Eagle Scout, but the big accomplishment, honestly, was my two sons are both Eagle Scouts, and that was a heck of a lot. That was a heck of a lot harder than me getting it.
Yeah, you told me once about a wilderness adventure you all had in Alaska. Can you share more about that, please?
Yeah, well, actually, we did a bunch of pretty rigorous backpacking camping experiences over the years, and it's in this day and age, it's not so, and even back then, when my boys were young. It's not, there's a lot of distractions. There's lots of other things that they could do. And Boy Scouts, is not high on everyone's list. But if you can intertwine adventure and excitement and time with your dad or with, key people, where you're focused 100%, you can't get service. Back then it was BlackBerry, but, you can't get any service. And you're doing experiences together. It's transformative. Those are the experiences that, my boys, who are men today, remember vividly because we did it together. So we did Appalachian Trail. We did Rocky Mountain National Park. We did Philmont in New Mexico, for 11 days and 37 miles and all over, things. And we did Alaska. And Alaska was honestly the most difficult one. It wasn't the most elevated in terms of altitude, but it was really, really hard because it was all backcountry. We did the Wrangell St. Elias National Park, which we flew into Anchorage. We drove 8 hours to this little town. Then we took little... Okay,
so you flew into Anchorage on this 8-hour drive. This was pre-Google Maps, I'm guessing.
No, well, they were.
How did you get there?
Yeah, so we flew to Anchorage. We drove in vans with all our gear to this 8 hours to this little town, and then we had to pack our gear up and fly on these little planes over the mountain and land on a glacier. They dropped us off, and 8 days later, they picked us up on a little mining strip 2 glaciers over. So we were just like,
so how did you know what glacier? It's the one with the least polar bears, or like how did you navigate?
Well, we hired a guide, which I highly recommend. And this guide had written the book on Wrangell St. Elias National Park. So he basically knew it like the back of his hand. So we had a guide. We had, my boys. We had a couple other families, and it was just. It was so, it was breathtaking, right? Being in just real wilderness, like no one touched it. And there's no paths, right? There's no like trails, it's not, the Appalachian Trail was a hard, rigorous thing, but there's a trail, like, a lot of people do it. There's no trails in Alaska. Right. So we were just every step you're like, I looked over at Dr. Fry, who's a good friend, and his sons were with us. And I'm like, no one would ever believe what we're doing. Like every step we had to take, you had to think about, because it's rocks that are move, and there's crevices in these in these glaciers, and if you slip down into a crevice, you die. It was pretty crazy, but that was an awesome trip, and one that none of us will ever forget.
Yeah, what do you think? Like, what did you learn from that adventure?
The things I take away from all of them, and that one in particular, is just how important it is to unplug and be present. We spend so much time, and I'm guilty of this as well. Interacting and being on our phones and just being connected to the world, and you forget what it's like just to freaking think, just to be, and to be present with the people you're with. And I think the more we could do that, the better off we would be as individuals, as families, and as a society. Constantly being bombarded with outside influences of what's happening, and worrying about with the politics of the day, or all these things that it's easy to get sucked into, because it's really well designed to do that. But the reality is, if we can get away from that, we'd be a lot better off. And it doesn't mean you can't, it takes like an hour to get replugged into everything that happened in the last 2 weeks, right? Like in 2 seconds, you'll know like all the fights that happened, who's trying to cancel who, what's going on, like all that ridiculousness or you could spend the 2 weeks like watching it play by play, every little back and forth, and like, who cares?
Right. You can get the
honestly,
recap.
Like I don't like our current, regime and what's happening, and the whole free speech thing. I'm not a fan of it. But
like, so Smoke Wallin, not a fan of free speech. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm a fan of free speech. I'm the opposite. But I'm also like, really, how do they affect me? Like, how does our, like, whoever's president, like, it annoys me, depending on who's there. But it doesn't actually affect my life and my family and everything else. Like, unless they try to do something that's like egregious, which once in a while they do. Right. Honestly, like, doesn't affect you and me in our daily lives. And I think we have like, our society is so focused on that outside influence, and we're missing something. And life is about like being there and being present and being with each other. And it's about thinking. How do you think when you're bombarded by all this stuff all the time? Right. So that's what I take out of those experiences, and I try to go back there. I try to remember. I try to separate myself, and I'm not always good at it, but I you see the background.
That's like from the Amalfi Coast, or
I took that last weekend. So I was over there and had some really amazing time. Exploring Italy, and before that Dublin and London. And it's just being unplugged and being in different places. For me, it rejuvenates me. It makes me inspired again and wanting to do new things. And I think we all would benefit from just unplugging.
Yeah. So go to Italy to reset instead of watching the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial incessantly. That's,
oh my goodness,
good takeaway.
I mean, I know that was like riveting, and I did follow it on the periphery, but I mean, come on. Like, how did that help you with your life? I'm glad Johnny got some redemption. It seemed like the right outcome happened there, but like, really, like how does that affect you and me? It doesn't. It's just sensationalized.
No, I think it speaks to what you're saying earlier. It's a fun distraction, but if all you have is distraction, you're going to be quite unfulfilled.
Exactly.
I want to learn more about the early start of your career. Can you tell us, what did you major in, and then how did that set you up for your first post-college job?
Well, I'll tell a story that I didn't used to tell at all, and I finally told it 20 years after leaving Cornell, when I came back to speak at the Entrepreneurship Center, or the program at the hotel school. And it really was about failure and what you do in the face of failure. And for me, I wasn't the most serious student. I was a good student in high school, and I aspired to do more than what anyone told me I could do. So other than my mom, who was like, you can go to Harvard, you can go, whatever.
Your dad's like, maybe not Harvard, but Cornell's a possibility.
Yeah. Well, I did apply to Princeton, which I did not get in, but
failure.
I basically was trying to follow Brooke Shields. She was 2 years ahead of me, and I was like, I'm going to Princeton. I'm going to like.
That's a good one to follow.
Yeah, but they didn't really like that in my interview.
You should have just gone straight to the Blue Lagoon. Forget Princeton.
Yeah, exactly. No, but so I was kind of a scrappy person. I got into Cornell in engineering. Quickly found out that you had to spend a lot of time in the library and actually studying, or
yeah, it's weird.
You will get crushed by the other engineering and pre-med and other folks. I had a class called Chem 207, which at the time in the country was rated the hardest introductory class in the country. It was a weed out course, right, at Cornell. Cornell, like Brown, they coddle you. If you get into Brown, like this is probably still true today a little bit, but maybe it's changed. But the traditional story was you get into Brown, like there's nothing you can do that they wouldn't get you through it, right? Like it's super. Once you're there, they're coddling. Cornell's like whatever. It may be maybe a little easier to get in, but like they'll kick you out like that, right? So they're like so the weed out course, Chem 207, 1,400 students, all top of their class from high school, whatever. They're all like trying to be engineers, doctors, vets, whatever. And you have to, and it's a perfect bell curve. Now they probably don't even exist anymore, right? In today's like downgrading of merit,
it may not be a safe space if you get kicked out. Smoke. Things are different.
Do they have bell curves anymore? Like, does that exist? Do they like
If it's part of your truth, they have bell curves. If it's not, then they don't.
Well,
I just checked.
So just for your audience, the bell curve is it's a distribution, right? And it almost everything falls into this distribution. And there's extremes. Well, to pass this class, you have to beat the bottom portion of the bell curve. And so to get a D-, you had to beat 270 other Cornell students who were all think they're going to be engineers, doctors, and stuff. So my D- was a win in many ways.
Absolutely.
270 kids that I beat.
You worked harder for that D- than most A+ you got in high school. I would bet.
So fast forward, I moved around in the school, and I kind of lived on academic probation on and off. I was a wrestler. I had other priorities, and whatever. I'm not proud of it, but I was getting through fine. I had an internship at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. I was working there in the summer of '87, so date myself a little bit, but a long time ago. And I got a letter from Cornell saying, "We invite you to prove that you can do the work somewhere else." So in other words, they kicked me out. They said, "You're on academic. You're out. You're suspended." Yeah. And you have to get at least a 3.0 at a accredited institution. And so I'm like, okay, my parents are teachers. I had no family money. It was just like I was borrowing money and on scholarship, until I lost some of them. And so I was like, all right, I'm working in Boston. What am I going to do here? And part of me was like, screw it. I don't need a degree. I'm just going to go start a business. Like that was literally like my internal debate was.
You and Bill Gates were having a similar, thought process at the time.
I'm like, I don't need them. I can just do it. But then I'm like, well, I'm almost done. That was the summer of my junior year. So I was like, I got one more year. I think, am I really going to quit? I'm not a quitter. Like, I can do this. So I heard about Harvard had this night school called the Harvard Extension. And I heard it was basically designed for the community of Boston. So it's the same professors. It's the normal Harvard people. It's on campus, but it's for local people in Boston. And so it's a fraction, 10%.
For the townies, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, for Goodwill Hunting, it's for the like the janitor guy, right?
Right, right.
But and so I'm like, I could probably do that because I could, it's 10% of the cost. It's like, $400 a class or something. It's some ridiculously low price. So I went over there. I showed them my Cornell ID. I said, hey, I'm working in Boston. I have an internship at the Ritz-Carlton. Can I take some classes? And they're like, yeah, sure. It was like, no problem. So I signed up for a full semester of classes. I went to the Ritz-Carlton. I said, hey, Harvard invited me to be a visiting student this semester. So can I extend my internship? So I had a job and, had a job through the end of the year. I got a 3.5 and got back into Cornell and finished. And, wow. And so Harvard was my stepping stone school. Like I used them to get back to Cornell.
Yeah. Take that, Cornell.
I love to say. But the lesson is really about, it's really about what do you do in the face of challenge, right? And it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with like, what was that in me that made me do that? What do I learn from that? Because I certainly wasn't aware at the time of like what was driving me to make me do these things. But when I look back on it, I'm like, okay, as I became an entrepreneur, as I started my life in business and I started creating companies, and every single thing that I ever did, like there's challenges, right? Like there's big challenges and that you don't control. And, the things you do control are about your response and what you do. And that was really, for me, it was about, okay, I'm faced with this kind of dilemma of like, do I quit? Do I just give up? Do I go do something else? Or do I figure out a way to finish? And that instinct for resilience is probably the most important quality that someone can have, I think, in entrepreneurship, in business and life. And it's about like, don't take no for an answer. And in sales, it's don't take no for an answer. It's how do you figure out someone says no to you? It just gives you like, now I have to learn, like, why did they say no? How do I get them to change that? Right. Mm-hmm. And so like that for my, my education was, less than stellar in terms of my performance, but I finished, I got done. I did what I had to do. I did get to a little redemption. I went to business school and at Vanderbilt, and by the way, which is almost minor miracle, they accepted me because of like, if you saw my transcript, you'd be like, okay, that guy was literally last in his class. But you know what they call a person who's last in their class at Cornell?
What?
Cornell grad.
Yeah, exactly. And some are even able to be guests on the Matt Balaker podcast. So, I mean, if you have that on your resume, good things can happen.
Exactly. So, at Vandy, I was like, okay, I had 2 little kids. I was like, all right, I'm motivated. I want to get this, MBA.
Yeah. Quick time out. So you had worked in beverage for a while before Vandy, or did you go pretty much directly from the Ritz-Carlton to Vanderbilt?
No, I
know there was a stop to have some kids, but we don't need to get into that right now.
Yeah, so I got out of Cornell. I ended up going to work for Seagram in their management training program, which people don't really know Seagram today because it got broken up and sold, but you might know the brand. But Seagram was the best managed beverage company in the world at the time, and they were the leader. What Diageo is today, it was Seagram up until they were broken up.
Yeah, Seagram's wine cooler were the gateway drinks for many a college kid, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But brands that you would know today, like Crown Royal and Chivas Regal and Captain Morgan and just a whole host, Jameson. These were all brands that Seagram owned, right? And they got broken up, and Pernod owns part of them, and Diageo owns part of them. But that was like the best training you could get. So I went to work for Seagram. At the end of the summer, they invited me to transfer markets, and by then I was engaged, and I ended up getting married and having kids right away, and worked for my wife family, her dad was in the beverage distribution business. So he gave me an offer to, instead of moving away with his daughter, he's like, well, would you like to come work for us? And you can be a sales rep. And I'm like, okay, I'll try that. So then I was selling wine in grocery stores and had a whole experience there. But yeah, so I did a number of things there. I started a company within that company, a bottled water company, which in '91 was really early days, right? There was only like Perrier and Evian, and there wasn't a lot of other waters. We later sold that to Nestle. And then I was like, okay, I have 2 little kids. I should probably go get an MBA now before I get too sucked into things. And I was going back. So I was a lot more, I had a different attitude. And just one last anecdote about this is, like, I went to school and I was like, okay, I'm really motivated. So I'm going to every class, unlike my Cornell days. And we get to the test time and I'm taking these, finals or preliminaries. And I'm like, man, these are like so easy. I never knew how easy it was if you go to class. Like, if you actually go to like show up, the tests are really easy. I was always like,
they give you hints every session.
I literally, in Cornell, I took 2 classes at the same exact time slot in 2 different schools at Cornell, so that I could blow them off at the same time. And
that's efficient.
It was very efficient. But it didn't occur to me until the prelims and the exams. I was like, oh man, I got to take the test at the same time. So I had to take one, finish in half the time, and then run to the other one and take the other test. And I had to get A's on the test because I was getting F's on everything else. So anyway, fast forward to business school, totally different experience, did really well, and got out.
So I'm curious, compare and contrast selling wine to grocery stores versus being an MBA student at Vanderbilt in terms of business acumen. Like, what taught you more, do you think?
I think at business school, I got a framework that was good, that was helpful. I learned some things I didn't know, like accounting, some accounting stuff and some, finance things, concepts. But there was one class that we were like presenting in, and I was probably a little cocky and aggressive young lad at the time. And somebody asked me some question, and he was like, I think he maybe was the top of our class, like academically, but totally clueless in terms of like business. And he asked me some question and I was like answering, he kept asking me this question. And I was like, dude, have you ever sold anything? and that encapsulates the difference. You can get real good at all kinds of things in business school, but if you don't know how to close, it doesn't really matter that much. And that I had before, and I had through and after. So that had nothing to do with business school.
Nice. So you're a closer, and there are millions of sales books. I remember Kinko's Copies used to have like kiosks full of them, and there's so many different philosophies. Some say, you don't take no for an answer when it comes to sales. So let's be clear. And others are like, well, no, there's lots of fish in the sea. If one potential customer says no, that just redirects you. What are a couple principles that you hold dear when it comes to being a closer?
Yeah, it's all about, there's always a way to a yes in a business, in a sales situation. So no just means they need more information or there's something else that you don't know about. So it's like, all right, so if I get to know, like, what's driving that? So you have to have some curiosity and you have to have thick skin, because you're going to get a lot of no's, for every yes, you're going to get, dozens and dozens of no's or maybe more. And it's about like, okay, sometimes a no is like, it's not worth trying to change that. Let's go find someone else to say yes. And sometimes it's, all right, let's figure out what happened there. And how do you change that no to a yes? And a lot of times you find out that it had nothing to do with what you were pitching. It just had something to do with them or what they were doing with their company or their current situation. So, the more information you can get about who you're dealing with, the better, right? And in today's world, like, there's no excuse not to walk into every meeting knowing everything about who you're talking to. I mean, if you don't do the basic homework where you know where they went to school, you looked them up on LinkedIn, you looked at who you have in common, you looked at, you do a little bit of searching, and you're in a situation where you have ways to connect to them at a different level that's not just a buy-sell relationship. And anyone that doesn't do that, like, doesn't deserve a yes. I mean, honestly, it's like it's just basic work. And if you're willing to do the work, like, you have an advantage over people that aren't willing to work, which there's a lot of them today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much easier to gather information. Like you said, I've worked in sales in some capacities here or there. I'm never, amazing at it. But one thing I could do is go onto LinkedIn. It takes 20 minutes and you get a good deal of information. I remember when I first started working, which was the early 2000s, it was kind of pre-social media, and obviously the internet was there, but it was a little bit frowned upon, I think, to quote unquote, like, stalk, and by stalk, I mean like Googling. And I'm curious, because you have, children or kids that are now adults in the workforce. I mean, I've never been great at holding my tongue. Like, I mean, I've always kind of gravitated towards entrepreneurial things. I think largely because I can't stand being at like a huge Fortune 500, with like HR departments and meetings every day. But, if I were telling my kids, like, I'd be like, maybe don't follow my lead. Like, shut up sometimes. You don't have to post every immature joke you think of online, but, you're still a person. Like, how do you coach your kids or people in their 20s and 30s now about what to say and what not to?
Yeah, like if they had social media when we were in college, we'd all be canceled already, right?
Of course,
there was like, it's crazy. But it kind of serves as a check, right? Like, you can't do. People can't do the things that used to happen, as much, right? Because it's probably going to be on camera. If they do it, it's going to get caught. So it's a little bit of a check. But I think being aware. I'll give one quick story. Because my kids were like coming of age when Facebook was getting going, right? It was like kind of and I got on early because I wanted to know what the heck it was, So like and my oldest son was like graduating in like 2007, I think, and Facebook was just getting going, and they were going to college, and so I joined with my Cornell ID, actually, my Cornell
.edu,
but in the beginning you couldn't join Facebook unless you had a university email.
They're like, we don't want our moms and dads on this.
Yeah. So, well, I guess, but if you had a university email, you could get on Facebook. I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers that, but like the only way you could get on in the beginning was with a university ID or a university email. So anyway, I joined, and these guys were like, freshman year, they were, all his buddies went to different colleges and stuff, but I was friends with them because I just, was in the thing. And there was a lot of, one guy in particular was doing a ton of, I'll call it shit posting. He was just, crazy, just whatever stream of consciousness, saying, fuck this, fuck that, all kinds of stuff, right? I don't know if this is a rated show or not, but
it was, and you obliterated that, but no, it's fine.
Yeah, well, whatever. I'm not worried about it. You can edit me. You can bleep me.
No, please.
If you want to bleep me, you can. Anyway, the point is, they came over. It was like summer break, and we had all these kids over for like a cookout in our backyard, and we're hanging out, and I'm like, hey, let's all talk about. I want to, fun night. We're having a good conversation, and then I'm like, listen, I want to bring up this topic of like what you guys are like thinking about, because where do you want to do down the road? And this kid in particular wanted to be an attorney, and I was like, okay, so I didn't make it about him, but I made it about like, when I was in college, like we kind of did whatever, and there was no record of it.
Right.
And no, I was a good person, but like there was a lot of craziness going on. And now there's a record of everything. And you need to think about how you position, because at some point you're going to get a job. At some point you're going to apply to law school. At some point you're going to be in the workforce, and this is all like on your permanent record in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it in a way that was not like about the one kid, but he got the message, and he actually deleted his Facebook, started a new one, and that kid is now an attorney, very successful, like, had a whole great career since then. But and he probably will remember this conversation, but it was just about like, at some point people are going to look back on this, and like I didn't know about that. Was before cancellation and all this ridiculousness that has come forward, that is looking back on somebody's tweet from 20 years ago, or something like that. But I was right. Like, hey, there is something to the narrative of like your life, and you have to. I think people need to be genuine and true, but you have to be a little bit guarded, because you just can't have a stream of consciousness out there, and unless you get to the point where you're non-cancelable, which is very few people, right? Like Joe Rogan,
very few people, yeah,
and Elon Musk are there, but a lot of us, you don't want to be attacked by the mob, right?
You don't, and so you just shared a lot of important stuff. I think a key takeaway is, what percentage of this attorney's income do you think you're owed? Because I think it's pretty clear, Smoke. You set him on the right path years ago.
Oh no,
15, 23%. What's appropriate?
If I got a piece of everybody, I think I helped along the way, I would be vying for Elon wealth. But, no, that's not why I did it. It's not why. Hopefully, I do anything. It's really about like, if I can just nudge someone a little bit in the right direction, and it helps them a little bit, then that feels good to me. And I love to see that happen. And over the years, and there's lots of folks that are, hopefully a little bit better off from my interaction with them. And I strive to do more of that.
It's your Eagle Scout wisdom in different forms. So
I guess so. I mean, look, the Scouts had some great, principles, but it was really about, it was really about doing, learning about leadership. I was the senior patrol leader, like from the day one of our troop, because it was like a new troop.
Mm-hmm.
So like I walked in, and I was like, almost literally the first month I became the leader of our group of boys. And that never stopped in my life, right? So you have to practice these things. And you asked about the sales thing. There's lots of sales books, and I've read, tons of them, but there's techniques, and you can learn techniques from a book or from a training, but there's nothing quite like walking into a buyer and having them tell you no and having to deal with them, right? Like I flew down to Bentonville back when it was really hard to get to, when Walmart, this is like early 90s, and I was selling our bottled water, and I was probably, 25 years old or something. And I went down there on my own. I didn't know anybody. I got a meeting, and you had to fly to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and drive 3 hours, because the Bentonville, the big regional airport, wasn't built then. And, went into Sam's Club, and these guys were huge, right? They were giant even back then. And we had, at that point, the #1 bottled water in the state of Indiana, which is like, it was great. It was a great accomplishment, but it was like, one state, it's a small state, whatever. But I was like, okay, we have all the restaurants, we have all this great distribution, but I want to get into Sam's Club and to Walmart and, major distributor. And they were like, the guy was like, okay, well, I know what it costs you to make this. Here's what I'll pay. You guys need to drop to this price, and I'll put you in. And I'm like, no, like, here's my price. And he's like, no. This is what I'll pay. And I'm like, well, if I gave you that price, you guys are going to sell it for some really ridiculously low number. And I'm the #1. I'm selling at the same price as Evian in Indiana in restaurants. And so I'm a super premium luxury brand that we've created of a local water. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. Like, this is what we'll do. And I'll buy, X amount of pallets in every store and blah, blah, blah. It was a big order. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no. And he's like, nobody says no to me. I'm like, no. And literally, like, he started laughing at me. He's like, kid, nobody says no to us. I'm like, I'm not going to give you that. You guys to ruin our brand. But it was like an early lesson in, like, you have to hold your ground. And so many people, chase things, and they're willing to like bend over and do whatever, to make a sale. It's not about that. It's about, you have to have integrity. If you're in the branded business, you have to have some integrity there, and you have to have consistency. So we said no. I said no. He laughed at me. I left. I went there. I thought it was a big failure. I went back home. We did not get the deal. But like a year later, they brought it in anyway because we had so much demand and we were doing so well. So they brought it in. They paid a fair price. I mean, probably gave him some discount, but it wasn't anything like he asked.
So you stood your ground. It's very, very impressive. So we're wrapping up, but I'd like to get your thoughts on, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned in business, and how would you translate those to people who are starting their careers right now?
Well, first of all, thank you. First of all, I think that I'm, a serial entrepreneur. I've done a lot of different businesses, but I got a good foundation working for bigger companies. And I think that's underappreciated today sometimes. It's great if you're Bill Gates and you have some great idea, or Dell, and you create an idea in your dorm room and you have this big success. But I think for the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs, it's really good to see what a successful business looks like, and from the inside, and get some experience. So I think there's a lot of value to working for successful companies for some period of time before you go do your own things. That's, number one. Number two, I've been willing to kind of risk it all a bunch of times. So I'm a profile in Colby. I don't know if you know Colby, but it's kind of like one of these rating, system where I'm what they call a quick start, which means I'm the ideal big game hunter, salesperson, or entrepreneur. Like, I'm the actual prototype of that person, which is, I make a decision very quickly. Maybe sometimes they say ready, fire, aim, so you're okay with vagueness and being able to just make a decision and pull the trigger or whatever, do whatever you have to do. But my coach, who was like taking us through this, he said, so the good news is you are that prototype. Like, you are the perfect person for this. Your risk, you have a huge tolerance for risk. You can do all these things. I'm like, awesome, man. That sounds great. That's me. I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, but you make rags to riches a round trip. I'm like, oh, yeah. And actually, it's kind of true. So, I've made and lost, $20 to $50 million on paper a few times now, with different ventures I've done. So, there's something to having some balance and everything else. But like, you wouldn't do that unless you're willing to, risk it all. And so, not everybody has to be that way. And clearly that's just one, there's a whole range of personalities. There's people that, should be accountants, and there's people that should be, attorneys or whatever. There's not everybody shouldn't be an entrepreneur. It's not like a cakewalk, right? Like, there's ups and downs. I got into the cannabis business and invested heavily there, and then we spun out. We did a whole hemp business with vertical wellness, and we bet big when the Farm Bill passed, and we thought we could put products into Walmart and shelves everywhere with CBD, and the price was really high. We grew 1,800 acres. At the time I grew that, it was worth $300 to $400 million of CBD oil. By the time we harvested, it collapsed. The market collapsed, and you know the story. But we were very close to doing a SPAC merger on Nasdaq and 500 million valuation. My stake at that time was worth like $50 million. Here's one of my losses.
You're like, what plane am I going to buy tomorrow? Yeah,
yeah, I wasn't quite there, but we were like on a roll, and then the market collapsed, and I didn't realize, but like 7 of the biggest companies that raised like $400 million all went bankrupt. That like between August of 19 and March of 2020, they went bankrupt, and we survived in spite of that. But it was like, oh, like who knew, right? So I don't go back and like, was that a great decision to grow all that hemp? No, but would I make the same decision with the current that information that I had at the time? Probably, yeah. It made sense. Like it was a bet I'd make again, probably.
And it makes for a great discussion point on podcasts. So, I mean, you never know how you can leverage these things. Well, Smoke, you're the embodiment of brushing yourself off and trying again. I love it. So people out there who want to get in touch with you, maybe they want to invest hundreds of millions in your next venture, what have you. How can people out there learn more about you and what you're up to?
Well, I'm an open book. You can find me in lots of media, and of course on LinkedIn. I'm the only Smoke Wallin there is, so like, you can find me easily. And I'm always open to having conversations with good quality people, and I do a lot of mentoring these days and helping younger entrepreneurs, with their journey, and I enjoy that a lot. And I'm doing, some M&A as well, and helping entrepreneurs maximize their value with, some of that activity and having fun with it. So always open to conversations, and if I can be helpful in someone's journey, that's something I like to do.
Great. Well, Smoke Wallin, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.